Hi, everyone. My name is Martin, and I'm the Director of Marketing at Evolvin and your host for this session. I'm happy to have Mike Sanders as today's host. As Evolvin's Director of Technical Sales, Mike is committed to help leading organizations put an end to chronic performance and availability problems. Mike has over 30 years of experience in the IT field. Prior to joining Evolvin, Mike was at CompuWare Corporation, Dynatrace, for 14 years, where he consulted and sold application monitoring software and triage practices. While at CompuWare, Mike was responsible for product direction, field technical practices, and solution selling for the company's APM division. Hey, Mike, how you doing today?
Good, Martin. Thank you.
Great. So before we begin, let's welcome all the attendees and thank you for joining us today. This should be a great session. Now, let's quickly go over today's agenda. Mike will explore how proactively identifying unauthorized changes can prevent outages and other harm. Then, in the live demo, Mike will show key use cases for how our customers use Evolvin for staying on top of unauthorized changes for preventing and troubleshooting incidents. And we'll wrap it up with a Q&A. So, let's get started. Mike, I'm going to hand the controls over to you.
All right, let's get started. As Martin said, we're going to talk about unauthorized change today and how to identify, manage, and address them in our environments. So we all know, right? Change happens. And unfortunately, as much planning and knowing about the change that we do, we still have that dreaded unauthorized change. The unauthorized change greatly impacts our applications supporting our business. And because it's very difficult to identify these unknown changes, our incidents usually take a lot longer, causing more outage time and more cost to our business. So we need to know proactively about these so we can prevent the outages and also avoid any breaks in our regulatory compliance. So there's 4 things we're going to kind of talk about today. The entire webinar is going to be around, first off, as we talked about, operational issues are really cause a lot of grief from unauthorized change. It's critical that we can automatically detect these, and we need to be able to immediately validate our plan changes or the things that we know about and we want to do are implemented accurately and no unauthorized changes are placed in there. And then last but not least, we're all feeling the auditing processes both internally and externally. So we need to be able to know how unauthorized changes leave you vulnerable to more auditing risk. So let's talk about modern environments first. We hear a lot about now our cloud environments and things and processes that we're trying to do to eliminate the unauthorized changes. So we can lock our environments and only allow certain personnel to deploy via manually or automatically, but this limits our agility and flexibility. And over time, what will happen is we will loosen those processes so we can actually get things in place. The other thing, too, is many times our designated personnel cannot verify what they're actually doing. So unfortunately, we are deploying unauthorized changes into our environment. So there are tools out there like CyberArk that we can control our privileges. But the problem is it's impossible to then know what the user actually did. We hear from a lot of our customers that they've over-tightened everything down, and now when we have an outage, we spend a lot of time going screen by screen and keystroke by keystroke just to try to figure out what we did actually, and did we do something like a fat finger or a misconfiguration. You can standardize your environment, and this is very good. We're seeing a lot of cloud environments where we're doing the infrastructure as a service, and that's very good, and it's eliminating one part of it. But the key is we're then pushing our focus more at the application layer. And this is where more of our changes and customization is happening, and it's actually causing more business requirements to be made at the application layers. So the bottom line is simply this. We know you're going to be putting processes and practices in with new modern environments, but automatic change detection is critical. I had a customer just recently say to me, we have really built a big practice and process around it, but we have one problem. is we don't have any detailed data to enforce it. We don't know whether or not those processes and practices are even working. So Evolving can actually provide you that insight to help you with these processes you're putting in place. So let's talk about causal analysis. So basically, it's real simple. We know that 95% of our issues are caused by change. Whether it's configuration, data, capacity, workload, code, something actually has to change in most cases for an incident. If we take a look at it, when the change happens and the incident happens, we usually are pretty good now at getting alerted. The really biggest problem is your root cause analysis, and it's that time to finding the root cause. It's been shown that unfortunately unauthorized change is predominantly the fault for long-time RCAs. What we do know is once we identify, it's pretty easy for us to fix it. The problem right now is what changed and how do we actually get to the causal ID so we can fix this problem. Evolving tracks and correlates these changes, and what that does is it allows you to slash that RCA time down. If we can find out what changed very quickly, we can get to the root cause and fix it. So let's take an example very quickly about a simple screenshot. And in this case, what we can see up above is through our integrated view of alerts and changes, we actually have an APM alert for our on-demand loan that's actually slowing down. At the same time, we're getting a Splunk alert from Tomcat 01 that we're running out of disk space. By having the analysis and analytics that Evolve applies with their change, we can click here and immediately see that we have an unauthorized change. And what's happened is, overnight, somebody turned the debug flag on. We can see that it happened on Tomcat 01, and both our O2 and O3 servers are still in a normal state. Also, by having this detailed analytics, we can hover over the CI path, and we can see very quickly that that's the location that we need to go clean up. So if you think about what we did, right, we had an alert, we were able to identify the change, and we were able to identify what we need to do to fix it very quickly. So instead of us going through a long process and losing business operational either value or brand, we were able to resolve this very quickly. So now, ultimately, what we really want to do is prevent these. Now, I'm going to table this one, and we're going to talk about this during the live demo. I'm actually going to walk you through of how we actually have an unauthorized change happening, but it hasn't quite yet caused an incident. So how do we actually fix something before we actually have it impacting the business? All right, so let's talk about some of the things that we need to do to be able to accomplish these goals. First one is we need to automatically detect. We need to be able to know what is being changed anywhere in our environment. Too many times we hear people say, well, I'm only going to put it here, I'm only going to put it there. We always need to think about the entire application delivery chain. And we need to know what changed no matter what that application uses in our environment. We need to identify these changes at a granular level. We can't do this at a very holistic level and just say, well, that file changed. We need to know what changed, what the parameter was, and maybe how many times it changed. We also need to be able to correlate this to our approved change request. Remember what we talked about earlier, right? We are putting processes in to protect us, but we need to be able to correlate what actually changed with time, location, scope, the nature of the change, so we can actually get a very good, clear picture as what we intended to do and what we actually did do. Now, one of the key things that we hear a lot, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit of detail, is how do we actually deal with change requests when our data is not really that good? So many times we come in and people say this is really, really fantastic, but our processes aren't that good yet, and we get very generic comments or maybe an email or something that just says, hey, I'm changing XYZ tonight. So how do we cope with that? We're going to talk about that. All right, so let's start with the basics, and this is the key: collect all changes. We must have an accurate and detailed data around all the changes that could affect the application delivery chain. So if you think about it from a simple OSI model, We need to know from the highest application stack all the way down to the most detailed infrastructure layer of what changed. Because at any point in time, one of those two can affect the other. An application change can actually have an impact on the infrastructure. And many times I even talk with our customers who have our infrastructure as a service. I say, hey, think about it this way. If you make an application change, can it change your storage? The answer is yes. So we still need to know all the details around all of our layers of our application. And I'm going to pause just briefly as you're reading this. This is just an example of what we cover. Please feel free to reach out to your pre-sales teams to talk about your environment and what we can do for you. Okay, so let's correlate the actual and plan changes. Okay, so here's where it gets really fun and interesting, right? So first off, Evolving is capturing the data, right? We just talked about that. We get all of the changes, but now how do we use this in context with your service integration platforms? So the first thing is, who's going to do the change and who actually did it? Is it manual? Do we have a release automation tool that's doing this? This is one of the first things we want to correlate because that applies different risk. What's going to be changed? What's the scope? What actually changed? Now, under this one, many times we talk about, a manual intervention into our RFC process, request for change. We say, hey, we need to know what you're going to change. What CI, what host, what are the details around this? So a lot of times people say, well, again, we're not that good. Well, what we have to be able to do is understand the change request, even if it's natural language. And we're going to talk about that here in a minute. We need to understand anomaly detection. So maybe we need to know something from a loneliness. What environment is usually modified within this change request? Did something get modified that's normally not done? And then also any pattern discovery. So can we basically see the consistency of change execution, and is something out of the norm? So if we can apply these auto analytics along with your input, we actually can get to more of that correlated data. And then of course the when, right? We want you to be able to put the authorized time windows in. When was the change made? So that is a little bit more accurate within our RFC processes. But still, with Evolving, we will be able to automatically identify maintenance windows per environment because we're learning throughout the entire time. And then based off of that, we can detect the change, whether it was a manual input or something that Evolving figured out on its own. So let's address that one, though, the what. Because that seems to be the biggest one that we hear from a lot of our customers. We're not real good. Okay, now this is a little complex, and I want to kind of talk about it very quickly because I think it will help you understand where Evolving is going and the power of our analytics. Low quality service data. Basically, it means this. We don't fill our data out very, very well. We're not good. So how can Evolving still help us? Well, let's just talk about the environment scope. Okay, linguistic analysis input. Okay, it's really a cool thing of what our engine does. It's basically natural language. Somebody gives us something and says, hey, I need to execute this against this, that, and I'm going to change this and do that against this host. Okay, if you've ever tried to correlate what actually changed, because there could be 700 changes, 37 changes, who knows what that number is? How do you correlate that back to that natural language? What Evolving is going to do is we're going to create queries. Basically, it's a selective process in which we're going to go through and we're going to figure all of this out and come out with an ability to understand the natural language requests. So by executing these query scripts, we can actually say, hey, that's an action, that's a CI, that's an environment. We understand the natural language. So when we get done, it's simply this. You meant to update this, take these parameters, and now we can correlate it. So this is the key of how Evolving is helping you out when you don't have the highest quality service desk data. We're going to help you with natural language, learning, and scripting to be able to say this is what they meant by what they told you. All right, so now that we kind of went through the detecting, what does it allow us to do? So let's get down to the final results. Prevent incidents, improve your processes, automate auditing, accelerate root cause. And that's the one we talked about at the very beginning, and we're going to wrap up with that one. So how do we prevent? Well, as you can see here, we're currently integrated into ServiceNow. And by doing this, having this bidirectional integration into your service desks, we know the detail of your change request. What did you expect to do? What did you want to do? And then down below, we're getting immediate data from Evolvent about what changed. So if my responsibility is to close my change loop, I can very quickly say, hey, there were 38 changes. Oh, and one of them is unauthorized. And we're going to talk about risk auditing, right? Because this is a great example of where an auditor may see this and go, what is that unauthorized? So keep that in mind because we're going to talk about it here in a minute. And then the nice thing is, being fully integrated into your service desk, one single click, we can actually look at the changes and see what that unauthorized one was. What about improving your process? Well, let's talk about policies or known states or keeping it in an environmental state of consistency. Here's the key thing. Many times we know certain configuration items that get changed will break an application. So why don't we put a little bit more details around that and say, hey, in these targeted environments, you cannot have a file policy change to or a security parameter around this file change. And what that does is it gives you that required conditions that it must equal this or it must not be below this. Great example is maybe on a WAS server we have a connection pool. Well, we never want our WAS servers to go below 50 connections. So we can set a very hard parameter to say, hey, you can never have a connection pool below 50. And you'll get immediate compliance issues detected on that because what Evolvent will do is take the analytics and say, these are the 4 things that are out of compliance to that. Immediate data to take actionable correction. So how about that audit? So let's talk about it. Today, we are getting audited. The reason we get audited is because we do not have this correlated data, and we have to be able to audit ourselves and say, hey, did we do what we said we were going to do? A lot of our policies and external auditing comes from, you said you were going to control this, did you do it? So when we take a look at this, here's a great example of an auditor's dashboard where they can immediately get compliancy data. Are we out of compliance with a policy? Do we have any unauthorized changes? The auditor can click on this and see the results of this and only ask those detailed questions. And ultimately, we want to accelerate root cause. And we've kind of already talked about this, right? Detect the actual changes. What is authorized versus unauthorized? What's the probable root cause? And do we have any configuration that we know about that's out of policy so we can resolve this very quickly? So the last thing is to close the loop of your processes. Look, unauthorized change is simply an unknown factor that can impact your business. So the best thing we can do is build our processes around this and automate as much as we can. But the reality of this is an unauthorized change will never be brought to 0. We can get better, but we can never get it down to 0. So let's use automation, the actual change detection and analysis. Let's close this loop process to try to get down to a 0 unauthorized change. Now, the reality of it is it's going to happen. But if we can keep it from impacting or having incidents, that's our goal. So let's do that. Let's just take a very quick look at exactly that thing. So I'm going to take you saw the screen earlier. This is a live demo. And basically what I can see is my job here is I'm going to come in and in the last 3 hours, I'm watching on-demand loan. And all of a sudden, I see I have an unauthorized change. So with Evolvent, I have the ability to drive in and very quickly filter and get that unauthorized change. Here's the nice thing. We can see very quickly in our APM integrated line, we do not have an incident yet. So we're now proactively ahead of this. If I move down very quickly, remember I'm getting that detailed data. So what it is, it's around a max thread on my Tomcat 01 server. Interesting is it went from 75 down to 15. And I have something because my O2 and my O3 servers are set to 75. So my first question is simply this. Why is this been moved to 15? Because my knowledge base is telling me this is a performance issue and it's critical. So let's look at the value history. Why do I want to look at my value history? My value history is very important because it's telling me what's happened, and I can ask the questions to the team why. So I have my Tomcat team on, and I can see that last night during our maintenance window, we had an authorized change from 75 to 150. The team said this was authorized because we were moving all of our Tomcat servers to this new thread, but we only wanted to move one, let it run for 48 hours, and then in the maintenance window on Thursday night, we would change the other two over once we knew we had no issues. Pretty simple process, something we all do operationally. The problem is, we had an issue this morning around 9 o'clock. Remember that debug issue? So we basically had that happening on Tomcat 01. Well, what's our first practice? Our first practice is to move all known changes back to the original state. And that's what the team did. Very quickly, they moved it back to 75. When we found the debug problem a few minutes later, somebody said, hey, the issue is resolved. It was a debug flag that was turned on last night. So the team reached out to management and said, can we put this back to the 150 to finish the 48-hour testing for the maintenance window Thursday night? The answer is yes. The problem is this should have went back to an authorized change, and the risk should have been dropped down to a medium risk or a low risk. The reason it didn't? Somebody did a fat finger. So here's a great example of we're doing the right practices in our environment, but it was just an accidental mistake. We set the value to 15, not 150. Evolve kept reporting this as an unauthorized change because the change request said it needs to be at 150, not 15. So by alerting you this, we can now get ahead of an incident and prevent it from happening. Okay, so I want to come back to this. Remember this screen? This is what I was talking about. By having this proactive look, we actually prevented the issue from actually happening. We were able to find out the change, we were able to apply the fix, and never have an operational outage to our business. So with that, I'm going to wrap it up, give us a little bit of time for questions and answering. I hope you enjoyed the webinar, and just a quick example of how Evolve is helping major companies get their arms around unauthorized change. So Martin, I will pass it back to you to open it up for questions and answers.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That was really great. We got a bunch of questions coming in here. So let's get over to them. I'm going to take control back now. Okay, so we got questions about how we handle these changes. Mike, do you have a setup for natural language queries for every type of change? So in connection to this, what kind of volume can be analyzed? This person brings up that they are handling 7,000 changes a month.
Yeah, so let's handle the volume, and then I'll handle the natural language. So the volume level, that's not an issue. We have very large customers who have hundreds of thousands of changes at times. We live in a world now that, change is not bad. Sometimes we are changing on a daily basis. So Evolve has the capacity, the analytics, and also the ability to handle noise to be able to handle very high volumes of change. Now on the natural language is a new concept, something that's coming and is coming fast and rapidly. So no, we do not have the natural language capability for everything yet. It's something that we are continuing to build, and we will continue to grow over the next, 1 month, 2 months, 6 months. This natural language is something that is being placed into Evolve, and it will grow long term, both with input from our customers as well as input from the industry standards. But the key is that we've got probably the predominant ones already started, the ones that we see that we kind of have a good known understanding around, and the rest of them will continue through through time as it evolves.
Okay. Next question. What about CMDB? Is a CMDB required? What if you don't have CMDB, but you do have a very strong and mature change management?
Great question. So CMDB is not required. Evolvin has its own technology in which we are actually detecting our CIs and understanding those changes. Now, if you have a very fully developed CMDB, we can be bidirectionally and integrated with that CMDB to where Evolvin can both help your CMDB be more accurate, as well as we can use your logical mappings out of maybe your BSM or your CMDBs to help Evolvin understand what your logical application mappings are. So if you have a very good practice and a very good BSM practice, Evolvin will be very instrumental in using that data, so that way we can correlate much better and much more accurately with you.
Okay. What kind of information or data does Evolvin need in order to detect unauthorized changes?
Yeah, good question. So we start this off with the basics, right? Time, right? We need to know when you're expecting to do your changes. You know, we want to have host information. And then we want to get down to the granular details of your CIs. So the more we can get, more information we can get from your CIs that are in your service desk, the better it is for us. So if we state, as you saw earlier, our max threads are going to be changed to 150. Well, now we can monitor that. And if it gets changed to 15, we can say, hey, you changed max threads, but you said it was supposed to be at 150, so we're going to continue to consider this to be an unauthorized change. Now, that's also where the natural language comes in. Sometimes our customers say, we're not that detailed in telling you what we're going to do, so we're going to try more and more through Evolvin to do the analytics about natural language and try to get ahead of the game and say, hey, you said you thought you were going to do this. We don't think you did it. We might report on an unauthorized change on natural language that may be authorized, but it's better to know and to investigate than not know and have a problem.
Okay, we're coming up to the end of our time. I'm going to squeeze in just a couple more questions, and then we'll have to take the rest offline. What is the average of unauthorized changes that Evolvin sees with their customers?
You know, I'm going to actually answer that one personally. I was a director of operations for about a $2 billion company, and I can tell you my experience through my life. I've personally, unfortunately, worked with a customer that was a company that was very good in our processes, and we still had 10% of our changes that went in were unauthorized. I've also worked with a company and customers that over 50% of their changes are unauthorized. So it's a very wide variable that I see. I would actually like to put that question out to the Evolvin team and staff. So please feel free to reach out to other individuals to see what their experience is. But I can tell you mine is anywhere, I've personally been involved with anywhere from 10% on a very controlled company to well over 50% for a company who was trying to get their arms around it.
And we just want to wrap up our session for today. So first of all, I'd like to thank you all for taking the time to join us for this session. I personally found this to be very interesting, very exciting. And right on your screen, you can feel free to drop Mike a line with any questions or feedback, or you can contact us to schedule a one-to-one. And on behalf of all of us, I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. Thanks again, Mike.
Thank you.